What did Hophni and Phinehas do wrong? And why did they do it? What they did wrong was acting the part and not really serving God. And the reason for it is because they didn't actually know him. They were born into these roles as priests, right? They didn't, and it seems like they didn't really understand their purpose. They didn't understand the priesthood, how they were chosen. That's why God went through all of that with Eli, saying, I chose your lineage to be these priests. And it seems that they didn't appreciate that, and they didn't really understand it. And they also didn't seem to understand God's laws and why they were doing the things. And if we don't understand why we're doing things, and we don't know the person that is asking us to do these things, and we don't trust them and love them, then they're just arbitrary rules to us, right? And so it seems that God was just a distant figure, and his rules were arbitrary to these men. The rituals had been handed down through the ages, right? But they were so far removed from them that they didn't understand them. And so what may have started out as apathy became just a blatant disregard. Their actions were completely divorced from their purpose. And so they were called priests, but the name and the duties that they performed and the clothes that they wore suggested that they were serving the Lord, but they were doing no such thing. They're just going through the motions and serving themselves. And so it's easy to look at them and say, yeah, worthless men, move on, right? But it'd be better if we would learn from them. They'd heard about God all of their lives, and they knew what it looked like to serve him, but they never had any personal experiences with him. And so instead of just saying that they're bad, let's look at ourselves and say, how well do we know God? Because that was their problem. They didn't know God well enough to actually serve him. And so is he just somebody that we know about, or do we truly know him? Do we maybe grow up in a Christian family knowing how to act like a Christian and going through the motions, but we never really take him as our own? Listen to what it says in John 10. I'm going to read you the first 14 verses because this is painting a picture. And it says, he who doesn't enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door, he is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they don't know the voice of a stranger. Jesus used this as an illustration, but they didn't understand the things that he was saying. And so he says to them, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers. But the sheep didn't hear them. I am the door, and if anyone enters by me, then he will be saved. And he will go in, and he will come out, and he will find pasture. The thief doesn't come except to steal, kill, and destroy. But the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. The hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, he sees the wolf coming, and he leaves the sheep, and he runs away. And then the wolf catches the sheep, and he scatters them. The hireling runs because he's a hireling, because he doesn't care about the sheep. But I am the good shepherd, and I know the sheep, and the sheep know me. And so the question to ask ourselves is, do we know Jesus? Do we know him so well that when he says follow, we follow, but we don't follow anyone else because we know that that's not him? You see, we can know about God, but unless we know his voice, we don't really know him. Unless we know the things that he would say and the things that he would do, we don't really know him. We have to know him so well that we can distinguish him from every other. We know his uniqueness. We know what makes him different. We know his character. right? Deuteronomy 4:24 says that God is a jealous God. Do we know God as a jealous God? Deuteronomy 10:17-18 says that he is the God of gods and Lord of lords, that he is great, that he is mighty, and he is awesome. Says that he doesn't show partiality, that he doesn't take bribes, that he administers justice to the fatherless and the widows, and he loves the stranger, and he gives them food and clothing. Have you ever experienced any of those things from God? Do you know him in that way? 2 Samuel 22:32-33 says, he is my rock, he's my strength and my power. He makes my way perfect. Has he done any of those things for you? Psalm 46:1, he's my refuge and my strength. He is my very present help in times of trouble. Has God ever been your refuge? Has he helped you when you were in trouble? Have you seen that he is good, like it says in Psalm 116:5? Do you know him as a spirit, as it says in John 4:24? Or as the light, as it says in 1 John 1:5? Or as love, as it says in 1 John 4:7-8? Do you know who he is? And have you experienced it? Head knowledge means nothing. You can know all day long, but if you've never experienced his love, if you've never experienced him as your refuge or as your strength or as your help, then you don't really know, right? Then he's just a distant figure. And then he has no authority over you. Then you see no reason to follow him, and his laws become arbitrary. We have to love him in order to serve him. And the only way to love him is to get to know him. Deuteronomy 10:12-13 says, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and keep his commandments, which I command for you today for your good. We have to understand God's heart behind his laws, and then we'll want to follow them because we see that it's for our good, not because he's just authoritative and telling us what to do. 1 Samuel 12:24 says, fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. So do you know the things that God's done for you? Have you had any personal experience with him, or is he just a distant figure in your mind? Are you pretending to serve God, but not actually serving him? Matthew 5:1-4 tells us not to do our charitable deeds before men so that we're seen by them, because then we'll have our reward from them and not from God. We need to do good things because we love God and because we care about people, and not because we want the glory, not because it's the right thing to do. We can go through the motions, doing all of the right things, and yet, just like Phineas and Hophni did, going through the motions, putting on the priestly clothes, pretending to be priests, but not actually serving God at all. John 12:26 says, if anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, then my Father will honor him. If you serve him, follow him. We can't just go through the motions, because then we will become complacent and apathetic, not having any feeling, not remembering why we're doing these things, right? With no feeling behind it. And then we're not really serving God. And our complacency and apathy may eventually grow into just blatant disregard, like it did for them. In John 14:20-24, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he says, in that day you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. He who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by the Father, and I will love him, and I will manifest myself to him. And Judas said to him, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world? And Jesus said, if anybody loves me, he'll keep my word. And my Father will love him, and we will come to him, and we will make our home with him. He who doesn't love me doesn't keep my words. And the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. And so we can't just say that we love God. We have to actually love him. And the way that we know that we actually love him is if we follow him, if we do his commands. If not, then we give ourselves away. Just like the person pretending to be a doctor, but not doing any of the things that doctors do. If we really love God, then we'll follow him. We'll obey his commands. We can't just act the part, because we might fool people for a little while, but we've never been fooling God. He knows if we're just going through the motions, or doing it for our own glory, or just out of tradition. And so if you call yourself a Christian, then you need to be a Christ follower. The titles mean something. They actually identify you. We can't just act the part. We have to live it out. Colossians 1:9-10 says, "Since the day we heard of it, we don't cease to pray for you and ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God." And so he says, I want you to know God and understand him in your spirit so that you can walk worthy of him. And then in that, you will grow in your knowledge and wisdom. And so if there's not any feeling behind your actions, or maybe you don't want to do the things that God has for you, then most likely you don't know him as well as you should. Knowing about him makes him distant and ordinary. When you truly know him, then you feel a personal connection with him. And you see there's nobody like him. And knowledge like that doesn't come from words on a page or information that you can gather into your head, right? It only comes from experience, seeing, hearing, feeling him. And so seek him. Jeremiah 29:13 says, "You will seek me and find me when you search for me with your whole heart." And so look for things that only God can do. Talk to him and pay attention to the things that he's saying back to you. He can talk to you. His spirit can talk to your spirit, or he can speak to you through his word, his written word, or he can speak to you through other people. So listen when he's talking to you. And then seek to know his goodness and his grace and his mercy and his love and his justice and his kindness and his compassion. These are not things we can know in our heads. We can't know compassion. We can't know love. We can't know mercy or grace or goodness or justice. We have to experience those things. And so seek to know how good God is, how loving he is, how compassionate he is, how merciful he is, how gracious he is, how fair and kind he is. Seek to experience him in that way. Psalm 34:8 says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him." And then 1 John 2:1-6 says, "My little children, these things I write to you so that you may not sin. If anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. He himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ourselves only, but for the whole world. For by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He who says, I know him, but doesn't keep his commandments, is a liar, and the truth isn't in him. For he who keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk as he walked." So we can say that we know him all day long, but if we don't act like it, then we don't really know him. If we don't keep his commands, then we are a liar. So seek to truly know God. Don't just act like a Christian. Follow Christ.